This is Jonathan Gephart with 643 Insurance, and I have with me today Dan Durrant from Durrant Law. And Dan is a personal injury attorney. I'm just going to let him introduce himself.
Hello, Dan Durrant. My law firm is Durrant Associates. We are in Northeast Mesa.
What does a personal injury attorney do?
A personal injury attorney is an advocate for an injured party. Whenever someone is injured due to the fault of someone else, they have a legal right to claim against that person. Typically, that person will have insurance, so the insurance company will pay for the damages that were caused by the at-fault party. We are an advocate for the injured party to get what they deserve from the insurance company. The biggest part of my job is to present to the insurance companies the information, the documentation, the medical records, everything that they need to document their file so that when there is a payout, it's justified on their records, and it pleases the client, but it's also justified on the part of the insurance. And that's kind of what we help facilitate.
What you're saying is, it's easier for you to help the client get made whole because you have the justifiable evidence to show that there's actually these injuries sustained.
Exactly. Let's say, for example, the client goes to the hospital and there's a diagnosis of concussion. Well, the client thinks, I have a concussion, they should compensate me for that. The insurance company says, this was done by a hospital, by someone who's trained in emergency medicine, which is basically to keep people alive and to stop bleeding, but not necessarily the intricacies of neurology. And so they may not accept that diagnosis from the emergency room doctor. So my job is, I now have this diagnosis. How do I get my client compensated for that diagnosis in a way that the insurance company will feel good about giving that compensation? And so if I tell my client, you have that diagnosis from the hospital, but you may be better off being seen by a board-certified neurologist, and that board-certified neurologist may disagree with the hospital and may say, no, you know what, you really don't have a concussion. You were thrown for a loop, but this doesn't qualify as an actual concussion. And that happens many times, whereas sometimes they do say, yes, you absolutely do. And now the insurance company has documentation that fits their expectations and can pass muster from a supervisor asking, why was that compensated?
What type of people can you help?
At my law firm, we help three basic types of people: people that have been injured in a car crash, people that have been involved in a dog bite incident, and people who have suffered injuries on a premises, like a big box store, a grocery store, something like that.
What are the steps that people need to take after an auto accident? The first thing to do, of course, is to check for injuries. Get to a safe space so that it prevents from causing further injury or another accident happening. The third step is to call 911. In an insurance claim, they're going to ask for documentation, and what better documentation from police? And after you call 911, you'll want to make sure to exchange information with the drivers. Do not admit fault to the other driver. Do not admit fault to the police. Do not admit fault to anybody. Your job is to accurately report the events that happened leading up to the accident. The job of the police, and that's the job of the insurance adjusters, to determine who was at fault for that accident based on the facts that are presented. The next thing to do is to document as much as you can. Take pictures of the vehicle if it's safe to do so. Take pictures of injuries if there are any that are visible. As you're going through this process, if you believe the other party is at fault, do not file the claim through your insurance company. The reason for that is because when you file claims on your insurance policy, even though it's a not at fault accident, your policy could be rated for having that accident on the policy. If not rated, they have a way of re-tiering policies and removing discounts such as accident-free discounts. If the other party's at fault, try to file that claim through the other party's insurance company, and then if the other party is playing games, they're not taking responsibility, they're not paying for what they're supposed to be paying for, then at that point you can involve your insurance company and file the claim through your policy, and they will subrogate, which that means that they'll go after the other party to get reimbursed for what they paid for that they shouldn't be responsible for paying for. Dan, is there anything that I missed, especially from the legal aspect?
Well, first of all, you did a great job outlining the steps. Documentation is king. When we present a claim to the insurance company, once again, they're not going to provide compensation for anything that isn't documented in their file. I think that's reasonable. So documentation is king. And when Jonathan, when you mentioned taking pictures, I would include any items that have been destroyed in the accidents. I've had clients that have had laptops destroyed, iPhones, eyeglasses, their clothes, because when the paramedics show up, they cut their clothes off. And many times those are expensive clothes that, clients get really antsy about wanting compensation for. So take pictures of anything that was destroyed in the accident, because if we show up to the insurance adjuster and say, you know what, she had a 5-carat diamond and it was just destroyed in the accident, they're going to need that justified. With respect to the police, I can't endorse what Jonathan said enough about calling the police, having them come make a report. Even if it's a simple accident, you need to have that documented, because the person in the heat of the moment, the defendant will say things in the heat of the moment that they won't say later when they're more calm. And so if an officer is there with his notepad taking down what the person says, then that is very valuable documentation that we can then use to the insurance company. Recent explanation was, I got a text message on my phone and I glanced to look at the text, and that's when the collision occurred. Well, you won't have that either if the police officer is there asking the questions and writing it down. So these things are really, really important by way of documenting what happened. And when you get to make the claim, documentation is king.
Even in small fender bender types accidents, even at a slow speed, there can still be injuries from that. Am I wrong?
Yes, you get hurt even at the small, low speeds.
One thing where it doesn't make sense to call the police is in a parking lot, because they can't do anything about that.
They don't respond to private property. Everything that Jonathan said about what to do applies, except for the calling the police, because they just won't respond to private property.
What are some important coverages that can be overlooked on an auto policy?
That question reminds me of the very first wrongful death situation that I ever had as an attorney. The state minimum liability coverage at the time was $15,000. It's currently $25,000, but the defendant at the time had the minimum of $15,000, and the occupant of the innocent vehicle did not have any of the optional coverages that Jonathan is hinting at. Uninsured, underinsured, MedPay, didn't have any of those coverages. And so all we were able to do on behalf of the widow, because it was the husband that was killed, was get her the state minimum of $15,000. And that's all that we were able to do. I've had other wrongful deaths where the client had great coverages on their own policy of uninsured, underinsured. And we were able to get hundreds of thousands of dollars for those clients because of the coverages that they had on their own policy. So uninsured is what covers if the defendant has no insurance. Underinsured is what covers if they have insurance, but not enough to cover all of the damages that they caused. And both of them are critical to have in order for me, again, as the advocate for the injured party, I am hamstrung to do my job if the defendant either has no coverage or less than they needed, and my client doesn't have UMUIM. UMUIM standing for uninsured, underinsured. But if they have those coverages, then I, as an advocate, have more ability to get adequate compensation for my clients. So those are often overlooked, but critical to have.
Did you talk about medical payments?
I mentioned it, but let me elaborate a little bit on why it's so important. Let's say that you have health insurance, and so you say to yourself, well, why do I need medical payments coverage if I have health insurance? Because medical payments does, as it sounds, it pays for medical bills that are necessary as the result of a collision. Why do that if you have health insurance? Well, the first thing is most health insurances don't cover chiropractic, and yet most accidents are the fender bender type. I mean, there are the more serious type, right? But on the whole, most of them are fender bender type. Well, if you need chiropractic for that and your health insurance doesn't cover it, there's an excellent reason to have medical payments coverage because it will pay chiropractic. Another reason is if you happen to be having your worst day and you cause an accident, the medical payments coverage will cover you even if you're the at-fault driver. So that's a remarkable benefit that medical payments covers regardless of fault. Even if you have quality health insurance, you're going to have deductibles and you're going to have co-pays. And so what we do is we'll lead with the person's health insurance, right? Get the benefit of the health insurance, and then we'll follow behind with the medical payments coverage to cover those deductibles and co-pays. And that stretches out the benefit of the health insurance and gets you the most out of the med pay.
Going back to the underinsured, uninsured, either someone that's driving that doesn't have an insurance policy in place, or it could even be a situation where there's a hit and run driver. There's just no insurance policy. There's no person to go after because you don't know who did it. And so, but the underinsured portion, state minimum coverage is $25,000 per person, $50,000 per occurrence, and then $15,000 for property damage. And let's be real, $15,000. How many vehicles on the road today can you cover for $15,000, especially with inflation these days? Not very many. In reality, underinsured is if someone has state minimum coverage. That's almost a guarantee underinsured type of a person. And so, if you are involved in an accident with somebody who has state minimum coverage, I was just looking up some stats. At the average medical bills due to an accident, not a serious one, but just an accident where there's a hospital involved, is about $42,000. If you have $42,000 in medical bills from a hospital, and the other party is only paying $25,000, you're left with $17,000 on the hook. Hopefully, health insurance would pick some of that up, but probably not going to pick up some of that, I should say. If you don't have medical payments, if you don't have uninsured, underinsured motorist coverages, it's just leaving you very exposed. I hear a lot of times, I can't afford this policy. I can't afford to have higher coverages for liability, or I can't afford to have carry comprehensive and collision coverage on my vehicle, but it's just too expensive. I can't afford to add medical payments or uninsured, underinsured motorists. I hear that a lot. And my question to people is, if you can't afford the increase on your auto policy, how can you afford all of the extra costs that you're going to incur if you don't have those coverages and something happens? If everybody in the state of Arizona carried the right coverages to take care of other people when they cause an instance, our insurance wouldn't be as high. That's the reality of things. The reason why it's so high is because of all the uninsured drivers, underinsured drivers that are driving around. The people who are doing the responsible thing and carrying the right coverages are paying for everybody, themselves and everybody else who's not following the rules.
This is one of the scary things that I have found during the life of my practice. I have found people that will go to an insurance agent and buy a 6-month policy, pay the premiums on the first month, and get the card for their car, for the glove compartment, to show the police or whatever that they have insurance, but they only pay the first month, and then they let the other 5 lapse. And then when the card that they show the police, when that lapses, then they go in and they get a new policy for another 6 months, pay the first month of premium. So in any 12-month period, they're only covered for 2 months out of that 12 months. So even if they have the card, you can't trust that they have insurance. Once you have the coverage that you need, then the cuts that you find in your budget come from not going to swig 5 times out of 7 days, or not having that latte or whatever, because those things don't really affect your future, but being properly covered in an accident will affect your future.
Talking from experience, we have been in a situation where we've had to use Dan. We've also had some clients that have used his services. We've had a great experience working with Dan. We've heard good things from those who we have referred to Dan, and he's a stand-up guy. One of the things that you hear about attorneys, especially personal injury attorneys, is you hear ambulance chasers, you hear all these different terms for lawyers. But Dan is a stand-up guy. He's a family man. He is someone who I trust. If you have any situations where you are not at fault for an accident, I highly recommend that you reach out to Dan. And I will recommend, if you reach out to us, I will recommend that you reach out to Dan to be made whole. Again, Dan Durrant from Durrant Law. And I will put Dan's contact information in the video. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you can check out our upcoming videos.